Sometimes on this channel, I will use a poem to explain another poem, but for this instance, I think I have to use a poem to unexplain the poem in question tonight. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the poetry discussion playlist, now approaching 600 poems strong, but number two, the Emily Dickinson playlist, a playlist of videos dedicated exclusively to the greatest poet of all time, Emily Dickinson. The poem in question today is If Those I Loved Were Lost, and it reads as such. If those I loved were lost, the crier's voice would tell me. If those I loved were found, the bells of Ghent would ring. Did those I loved repose, the daisy would impel me. Philip, when bewildered, bore his riddle in. Now, I am going to use another one of my favorite poems to unexplain this poem. This is They by Siegfried Sassoon. It is one of the trench poets, the trench warfare poets from World War I, one of his best poems in my opinion. It reads as such. The bishop tells us when the boys come back they will not be the same, for they'll have fought in a just cause. They lead the last attack on Antichrist. Their comrades' blood has bought new right to breed an honorable race. They have challenged death and dared him face to face. We're none of us the same, the boys reply, for George lost both his legs and Bill's stone blind. Poor Jim's shot through the lungs and like to die, and Bert's gone syphilitic. You'll not find a chap who's served that hasn't found some change. And the bishop said, the ways of God are strange. Now, for the purpose of this conversation, I hate to explain that I am the bishop. God, simply by the translation of this poem into the symbol that we need, God here is Emily Dickinson. I am telling you that the ways of Emily Dickinson are strange. She comes to us with poetry, and we might not know from whence this poetry springs, but we do have a little bit of context historically for this. You can find this if you search through the internets for interpretations of this poem. Philip. We have the Philip in question here. Philip was someone who led part of a revolution, a rebellion, against the Count of Flanders, and he died in a battle outside Ghent. The bells of Ghent would ring in order to let people know of important events, the breakout of war, the conclusion of war, notable people in society dying, etc. So, the last thing that we have about Philip was him, so he was, I believe, crushed to death. And the legend of Philip goes that the last thing he said was, why like this? Why am I dying in this fashion? So that's the riddle of Philip. When we take this poem again, knowing the historical content, I'm afraid it doesn't make a whole lot more sense. But here's the thing. This is ostensibly, when you read it, this is a poem of loss. If those I loved were lost, that is where the poem itself begins. The statement, if those I loved were lost. However, I don't think that's really what's going on here. I don't think that this is a poem of loss. I think this is a poem of being lost. Why do I say that? Why make that large a leap from this poem? Why make the observation, perhaps it's too tenuous a statement to really be called an observation, that this is a poem of being lost, not of loss. Simply this. Tell me what in here points to anything real. Tell me what in here points to anything concrete. If those I loved were lost. If is a very big word here. It's carrying a lot of weight here. If, meaning this thing hasn't happened, those I loved. What a barren statement. If imaginary people, fill in the blank people, were lost. What a weird statement to make. The crier's voice would tell me. The crier, what crier? If those I loved were found from what? Found from where? What are we talking about in this portion of the poem? The bells of Ghent would ring. The bells of Ghent are not where Emily Dickinson stays. That's perhaps a failure of imagination to suggest that one would have to be there for the bells to ring, that one would have to be present in the area about which one is writing. I understand that. Could be considered a failure of imagination. I don't think it is. Did those I love repose, the daisy would impel me? Tell me what that means. Philip, when bewildered, bore his riddle in. I think that what's going on in this poem, and I don't really like to make these types of interpretations very often, I think that this poem is more the author searching for themselves. I think this poem is Emily Dickinson searching for herself, searching for the life that she wants, or the life that perhaps she thinks she has. There's so many statements in this poem that do not point to anything concrete, that it has to be what you would think of as a philosophical poem, except that there's no philosophy herein. So, for example, I died for beauty. I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb. When one who died for truth was lain in an adjoining room, he questioned softly why I failed for beauty. I replied, and I for truth. The two are one, we brethren are, he said. And so, as kinsmen met a night, we talked between the rooms until the moss had reached our lips and covered up our names. That points to absolutely zero concrete stuff in Emily Dickinson's world. What do I mean by concrete? Read a Robert Frost poem, read a Charles Bukowski poem. It's just concrete. It's that person's life. I Died for Beauty has zero concrete inside of it, but you have all of the philosophy workings to point to, basically suggesting that beauty and truth are the same thing. That's kind of what the poem itself works around to. In my opinion, I don't know the philosophy here in this poem. I don't get it. I never get there with this poem. I don't get to that point. So, it is set up as a philosophy poem. It is set up as grandiose statements, but it has little frame workings. The scaffolding of this poem is the people that Emily Dickinson loves. It's set up around the people that Emily Dickinson loves. If those I loved were lost. So the scaffolding is very personal to Emily Dickinson. What would you call it? All of the drywall set on the sides of that scaffolding is impersonal. You're talking about the bells of Ghent. You're talking about some anonymous crier. You're talking about the daisy. You're talking about Philip. I think that this is a poem from someone who is lost. I think this is a poem of searching, looking inward toward the self to find what it is that someone needs, the type of belonging that someone needs to exist in day-to-day life. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on the channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.